Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you've got a pad and pen ready because there's going to be lots of great information here. We're chatting today with Philip Blackett, and we're going to be talking about a subject that is not talked about enough, and that is negotiating with and beyond neurodiversity. So, welcome, Philip. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Glad to be on the show with you.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing this sort of personal insights on this issue. Because, as I say, I think that we just don't give and pay. We pay lip service to this, but I don't think we really dig deep on this issue. And before I forget, for those of you who may not know Philip Blackett is a best-selling author, a consultant, a speaker, an entrepreneur. He's got this very interesting background with a master's in divinity, an MBA from Harvard Business School. He's got a bachelor's degree in poli-sci and economics. And he's also raising neurodivergent twin daughters, which I bow down to you. And also as a neurodivergent parent on the autism spectrum himself. And he has come here today to share his insights with us. And again, I don't think we talk enough about neurodiversity. So why don't you start by talking to us about what is that for our listeners out there who may be scratching their heads or not heard that term before?
Yeah, it's a great question, Cindy. I think neurodiversity seems like kind of like a new term, relatively speaking, where when I was growing up, being on the autism spectrum, it was more like Philip's just special.
Yeah.
Or it's just, Philip looks at things a little differently from the rest of the kids in the classroom. Or they talked about special education,
Yeah.
right? So it's a completely different way of thinking back in the 90s
Yeah.
versus 2024,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think the essence of it is still in the same. It's just being able to understand there is a spectrum of where people are thinking that can be different from what you call more neurotypical.
Yeah.
And it's more so the thought of saying, hey, understand that, yes, 2 + 2 = 4, but how people get to that may be different from what you're thinking.
Absolutely. I love that description. I think that's great. And, for so long, with the fact that you use the word special, which should be such a compliment, but for so long, it was like, oh, special needs. People almost had to put air quotes around it.
Yeah.
And there's been such a stigma around it for so long. And if you don't mind sharing with us about your experience on the autism spectrum growing up.
Yeah, so a lot of it I kind of learned from my mother because obviously if I'm not talking before the age of 4, there probably wasn't much for me to talk about by that point. So my mom and my grandmother had a much better experience understanding how I was like because they basically shared with me like Philip, like you didn't talk before you're 4. You basically
Yeah.
just looked at people, you just smiled at them.
Yeah.
This is what you did. You were nonverbal there.
Well, it's a
Um,
great smile. So there's a huge advantage there.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. I appreciate that. So on top of that, it's like I remember going to school early for like speech therapy class or occupational therapy. I remember my grandmother having me on sitting on her lap to work on those blue and white handwriting tablets. I don't know if they still do that today in school, but just really working on like penmanship and learning math on flashcards and that sort. But yeah, it was one of those things that for me, there was definitely a sense where it's just like I didn't catch on to things as quick as others. As
Yeah.
I got older, there was definitely a move for me to try to fit in as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I was like in middle school, like sixth, seventh grade, where my mom and my grandmother really kind of challenged me on that. It's like, why are you just fine with just being in the middle of the
Yeah.
class? And it was just more so just like I didn't want to draw attention to
Yeah.
how I was different,
Yeah.
because compared to nowadays, I mean, people kids can still be cruel back then, but
Yeah.
it's just like yeah, like when people see somebody different,
Yeah.
it can really like jar up the imagination of what people can respond with.
Yeah.
But it was that time where they really hit on a point for me to say, hey, whatever you're feeling, Philip,
Yeah.
like lean into that.
Yeah.
Like if you are creative or you're looking at things from a different way than everyone else, like go further in that. And
Yeah.
so it was something where like starting in sixth or seventh grade where I might have like a social studies project that I could have just done the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Like for an Egyptian class, I remember
Yeah.
they were like, "Hey, I want you to come up with an Egyptian artifact." I was completely content with just getting a rock outside my home, spray paint it black, maybe write some letters, hieroglyphics in white, and say, "Here's Rosetta Stone."
Yeah.
And my mom was like, yeah, we could do that, but then you'd be out playing recess afterwards. Let's think a little bit further. And just that notion, Cindy, was like, okay, Egyptian artifacts,
Yeah.
what more could I do with this?
Yeah.
And what pan out from there was me coming out with like a life-size 6 foot golden coffin that I built
Wow.
with like a mummy I got from like Party City, wrapped it up in toilet paper, lined up all these different artifacts, including my Rosetta Stone on there.
Yeah.
And my mom and I had to usher it from the trunk of our car into the classroom. Everyone's like, "What is this?"
I can imagine.
And I had this whole presentation to it, and safe to say, I got 100 on that project. But what it did was, Cindy, that was like the first time it hit me. It was like you could really like see where you can go with this when you're
Yeah.
not encumbered by what others may think,
Yeah.
or just by the fact you look at things different. So that came out as far as like that in 6th grade, 7th grade. I like dressed up in like actual Greek mythology character. Like I had the whole costume, makeup, and
Yeah.
wig and all in that sort. Even 8th grade, going from like middle of the class to like valedictorian in my class.
Wow.
And so I think a lot of it came from once I embrace what I thought was different
Yeah.
or weird or quirky
Yeah.
and channeled it in the right way where I actually could see like, okay, this makes more sense to me, and you got good results out of it as well.
Yeah. And I love that you embraced it, and that's such great advice because I don't know where, like that drive to fit in is so strongly conditioned, and it makes no sense. Any of the great achievements through history, right? Whether even in music in the entertainment industry, like and again, and maybe I'm dating myself, but Pink. You can bet she was not the average kid growing up in her class, right? I mean, some of the greatest inventions. And yet, even with my own, we had as they say, 3 kids in 3 years, and 2 out of 3 of them ended up having, sort of learning issues. My daughter had to have open heart surgery as an infant. She was in critical care for 3 months. So she was
Wow.
delayed in her speech. She was delayed in her, OT, her coordination was off. And then my son ended up, we thought it was because of the heart surgery, but then her brother was born and he needed speech therapy and had processing and cognitive issues as well. And they both just desperately tried to melt in different ways. Like Jade was just so quiet and never raised a ruffle, to the point where I showed up at class one time and she's sitting there quietly purporting to read a book. She's got the book upside down, Philip, right? Like I'm like, oh my God, and my
You had
son,
one job.
you know,
You had
like
one job to do here. You failed that one.
like you don't have to be that quiet that you're blending in. And Chase, the second one to come along as well, both of them were entitled to special, sort of compensations in the class. And, they could, Chase needed the teacher to require to use microphone. Anyhow, a whole thing. Neither of them, they both adamantly refused to take any of the accommodations they were allowed. They could have their tests verbally, they refused. They could take their tests separate room, refused. And then finally, though, Chase, by middle, grade 7 and 8, like you, he decided to embrace it. He was the shortest kid in the class, the graduating class, shorter than every girl and boy in the class, red hair, freckles, the whole shebang. And he just ended up embracing it. So what did you learn from those experiences? Would you say, did it make you look at human interactions differently, or?
Yeah, I think it's one where it's just like there's a part of me that says we never truly grow up because a lot of what we experience in childhood
Sure.
we're reliving to some degree as adults. And oftentimes we're going down memory lane as a parent because we're going through stuff that's like, I remember I went through that when I was a kid.
It's true.
And now you're asking yourself, okay, what do you do different now?
Yeah.
It's like you have a choice. So I think part of it is the sense that, you know, we might have talked about this before. It's like everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And what helped me kind of understand is like everyone struggles at something.
Yeah.
And it may not be with speech.
Yeah.
Maybe it's with math with somebody.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like, dealing with change when you're so used to routine.
Yeah.
Maybe it's dealing with confrontation where you feel like someone's personally attacking you, but they were just trying to give you feedback, but the way you're processing it is different from
Yeah.
somebody else. So I think one of the things that come off when I think about neurodiversity is the thought of, okay, there's certain ways I look at it, and it also can make me more compassionate and understanding for what someone else experiences too.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
you could be quote unquote neurotypical, but there may be something you're struggling with too that we
yeah.
might be able to say, hey, we have common ground.
Yeah.
Let's see how we can help each other.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful and powerful. And we're all different and we're all struggling about things at some point. We all struggle in some area. And when we can recognize that and celebrate our differences and help lift each other up, what a more beautiful world that is, right? To take advantage of that. Now, what tips do you have for any of our listeners who may be neurodivergent themselves on how to better negotiate and navigate using their neurodiversity?
Yeah, so I think one thing that comes off to me top of mind, Cindy, is just understand you know yourself better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can be your best advocate by understanding what's going on that you can
Yes.
resonate with somebody. So if you're a parent of kids that are on the autism spectrum, for example, or neurodivergent, you might look at it and it's like, okay, what was it like when you were
Yeah.
their age?
Yeah.
What were you going through at that time that may not be exactly what they're going through, but at least have some sort of shared experience? I think that is one that as a parent, you might have even more of a connection or more of a shared experience with your kid versus a parent that might be more neurotypical.
Yeah.
And so, once
Yeah.
again, lean into that.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to talk about that. Don't hide it and see how you can be a better advocate for your kids and for yourself in the process.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. And what tips do you have on the other side of that coin on how to have more effective negotiations and get better outcomes with someone who is neurodivergent?
Yeah. So, to have better outcomes when it comes to negotiation, I think, you know, you're always trying to find common ground.
Yeah.
And if you can do that in a way where, you know, it's never wrong to ask questions,
Yeah.
but it can be a wrong thing to assume,
Yes. Yeah.
especially if you come across someone that you know is neurodiverse. You don't know exactly what's going on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
They, like Cindy, they
Yeah.
call it a spectrum for a reason.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like you have one side of the spectrum
Yep.
and then you have another side of the spectrum,
Yeah.
and then everywhere in between.
Yeah.
You don't know exactly where that person lines up.
Yeah.
And so assumptions are a quick and easy way to kill a negotiation.
Yeah.
And that's just with regular neurotypical
That's true.
people, let alone, people on the spectrum. So the thought that comes there is just like if you're coming across that way,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to learn as much as you can about that person, not just where they might be lining up, but you know, there may be hints to figure out, okay, here's how we can probably collaborate. Here's
Yeah.
how we can help get more of what we're both looking to do. Or here's how I better understand why you took my angle on this a little differently than how I was expecting. Like, tell me more. Like, I'm
Yeah.
curious. Like, help me understand because I want to help you
Yeah.
and help us get more of what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's so good. And listen, I love that you said about the it's okay to ask questions, but don't make assumptions, right? And I would apply that even a little off topic here, but introverts and versus extroverts. And I grew up, I tended to be more extrovert for sure. And it was an eye opener for me, I've got to say, Philip, like, because my daughter is very much more on the introvert side of things. And it was so I read that book Quiet, which I thought was brilliant, really well done. But it's real eye opener. We've become such an extrovert driven society that we exclude or minimize, diminish the voices of the introverts in the room. And it's like the person who's talking the loudest and longest is the person who gets the most attention and sucks all the oxygen. And I worry sometimes as a society that we're missing these other viewpoints. And again, whether it's listening to introverts, whether it's listening to people who are neurodivergent and maybe are going to take a little longer to express themselves, or maybe are not going to speak out or express it in a way that doesn't immediately gel with that sort of thought process. And if we can open up more to that, what a better world it would be. What better decision making we'd be able to make in the corporate world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I agree on that 100%. It's one of those things that there's a diversity of people that we're not really taking into
Yeah.
account.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where, yeah, it's easy, it's easier, at least speaking out of my own experience, to be quiet about it.
Yeah.
I think that what prompted me to be more vocal about it is the fact that I have two daughters that are on the spectrum too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what goes on in my head is, what I thought was a curse for me, or even a curse that I went through as a parent, feeling like, oh my gosh, I gave this to my
Oh,
kids. I feel bad about it.
yeah.
This might be a whole nother opportunity because at least I know that those two have someone that's been through something similar.
Yeah.
And I could help with my wife to better understand how we can better support them
Yeah.
through their early development.
Oh,
But if we never get to a point where we were feeling okay to express that,
yeah.
my wife has very much learned a lot about me in the process of us parenting because I had to get better at opening up to her to share about experiences I had
Yeah.
from childhood all the way up through adolescence and that sort. I am an introvert
Yeah.
and I know how to maybe make a switch as necessary.
Yeah.
But my wife also knows, like, okay, give Philip enough time. He's gonna want to go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
You tell him you ask him, does he want to go out tonight? He's gonna be like, I'd rather just read a book.
Yeah. Give him his alone time. Let him
He,
give.
he needs some alone time. He's been out for
Yeah.
about an hour, hour and a half. I can already see in his face. He's
Yeah.
looking for the exit here.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things, just like there's such a greater opportunity for connectivity there
Yeah.
because
Well,
you recognize that not everyone is extrovert. You
yeah.
have introverts. Social media may give you the exact opposite view because you're
Yeah.
thinking everyone has to be broadcasting,
Yeah.
banging their chest, screaming from the top of the hills. But you still have, I would imagine, introverts and extroverts like before social media.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I love how your capacity to reframe things, like that reframe about your perspective with your daughters, like, oh, I gave this to them versus, wow, what an advantage this is. And I really want for our listeners to put a pin on that for you, things that, and just not just on this issue, but in the broader thing. When you're having viewpoints or stories you're telling yourself that don't serve you, reframe them. Just flip the story that you're telling yourself. Reframe that story to one that's a little more empowering, a little more positive is going to better serve. Now, you mentioned about your daughters. So, as a parent of twin neurodivergent daughters, can you share some advice on how to better parent neurodivergent children? Because I know a lot of parents, I think, struggle if they haven't come from that experience themselves. So, what do you have for
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, so even if you're not coming from the spectrum or you're not neurodivergent, it doesn't stop the fact that you're a parent of kids that you love.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
love should be a part of the equation, regardless if you're neurotypical or neurodivergent,
Yeah.
right? And also understanding that as a parent, you're likely going to be your kid's strongest advocate,
Yeah.
especially early in age,
Yeah.
where if it's something you don't know of, you're going to want to learn as much as you can. Just like if your kid has a medical condition that you weren't anticipating,
Yeah.
you're going to want to research,
Yeah.
ask the questions from the doctors and the specialists, figure out what, accommodations or
Yeah.
opportunities or options are available to support your kid.
Yeah.
And also seek out resources, say, hey, how can I have these conversations with my kid that better understand how he or she is feeling,
Yeah.
how to walk them through a potentially daunting event or events to happen in the near future,
Yeah.
and also just to really validate for them that it's okay, I'm here, and we'll get through this together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful. And in terms of the outside world, like as a parent, what advice do you have about handling, because you when you said the word advocate, it really twigged for me vis-a-vis your daughters or for the parents who are listening here as well. I know with my kids, it always seemed to be an issue, right? Whether you're advocating for their needs in the education system, socially or beyond, in terms of those negotiations, what advice do you have for us on that?
Yeah, I think it's always great to find good partners to work with. And it's not always the case, but it's one that you think about, whether it's with school or social events, sports, whatever the case may be, extracurriculars, being able to share what's going on with your kids with the right people,
Yeah.
because not everyone looks at this the same way.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't fault them either, right? And it's
Yeah.
helpful to be like I get it. Like this might
Yeah.
be something that might be new to you.
Yeah.
You might not have seen before, and I'm not going to take it personal. Like I actually see it as an opportunity to educate and to share what's going on, because in the process, you might actually come up with another advocate or ally or just person that's willing to support you. And so everything that you're doing is just helping your kid prepare for the real world, because I hate to say this, but as parents, we're not always going to be there
Yeah.
for our
Yes.
kids forever.
Yeah.
So in some sense, part of our job is preparing them for the real
Yeah.
world, both for people who do understand and also for
Yeah.
people who don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And let's talk for a moment about respect. I know you've got that great book out there about disagreement without disrespect, which I think is just a brilliant concept and very needed today. So in the context of this discussion today, the importance of respecting differences in our interactions, how can we be more intentional about bringing it to our conversations and our negotiations?
Yeah, so I think understanding is that you're likely not going to find someone that agrees on everything
Yeah.
with everybody, right? And so you're going to have differences. The question is not so much that we can put to the side.
Yeah.
Was more the question is how are we going to navigate them together,
Hmm.
right? And so I think when it comes to respect, it's also understanding like everyone is looking for something that is important to him or her.
Yeah.
How can we be someone that collaborates rather than competes to help each other
Yeah.
get more of what they're looking for?
Yeah, so important. I love that. And do you see empathy as being a factor in negotiations on this, particularly in the context of dealing with neurodiversity? And by empathy, I think people often confuse that with sympathy, not like, oh, geez, poor that, but rather, let me put myself in that shoes and see what that feels like. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, empathy is like, stepping into somebody else's shoes, even though if you can't fully feel
Yeah,
and understand 100% what that's like, at least making an attempt,
yeah,
at least trying to gauge, okay, what would that be like,
yeah,
to have a kid that doesn't process things the way that my kid does?
yeah,
How would I feel on that? What would I be looking for somebody to support me? Or, what would be important for me to be the most best advocate for my kid? And once again, this goes back to not making assumptions,
yeah,
because even when you're trying to be empathetic, it should open the door for you to ask questions.
yeah.
It
Yes.
should open the door for you to say, hey, that sounds really rough. Like, help me understand, like,
Yeah.
how have you gone through this?
Yeah, I love
You
that.
know,
And not
'Cause
only should open the door, but it's necessary to open the door, right? Like make sure you kick that door open and come with that
absolutely.
total open mindset. Now, when you talk about assumptions, what role do you think, I mean, sort of tied to that, I guess, that bias plays in dealing with neurodiversity?
Yeah, so I think assumptions is the fact that, listen, I'm on the spectrum and I don't know everything of what it means to be on the spectrum.
Yeah.
So if that's the case with me, what do you think is the possibility of somebody not on the spectrum to know everything that's on the spectrum?
Yeah.
So I think having a growth mindset to continually be open to learning
Yeah.
is key, because I think that the moment you start to feel like you know all that you need to know, that could be one that your assumptions could fall false and they could actually have someone become defensive
Yeah.
or build up walls, or even end the negotiation prematurely.
Yeah.
And so I think that being open to say, hey, this is a place that I don't know everything and I am open to learn. Help me, help us get to a better place by learning from each
Yeah.
other. You're much more likely to make better headway
Yeah.
in what you're looking to achieve versus the opposite.
Yeah. Oh, so good and so important because I mean, I think we come in with these biases often. And again, for our listeners, I really invite you to explore and raise your awareness about your own biases when you're going into discussions, not just for the outcome on the other person, the person who maybe is not neurodiverse, but also for the outcomes for the bigger picture that you're looking for. And I remember, Philip, as we were talking, it struck me, but, my daughter, when she was at the stage where you'd be looking at those next steps for, university and college. And we had the meeting because she had an individualized education plan. And it was clear very quickly in the meeting that the assumption that they always took in these, there was zero expectation that the idea of her going on to university post secondary would even be considered. And I had to really go whoa, time out here. There seem to be some assumptions that are made. Look at her grades, look at her creativity. The fact that she's creative and approaches things differently might be her greatest strength in university. And then they all did it. And sure enough, she ended up getting a scholarship to her university and went on to graduate. But when we make those assumptions, same in the corporate world, I think so many large corporations today lose out, whether neurodiversity or diversity based on race or culture or across the board. When we shut out those differences, we get worse outcomes. It's that simple. So thank you for really hitting a point on that with us, and thank you so much for your input with us here today, Philip. This has been such an interesting discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity, Cindy.
Now, I normally like to end by asking what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had? And again, it doesn't have to be about this issue of neurodiversity, but just what's a mindset shift that you had that made you think differently in how you show up in the world, Philip?
So I think I'm gonna go for a more humane way to saying this, as opposed to when they say there's more than one way to skin a cat. They used to say, because I don't want I don't want to think about okay this 57th way to do it. No, let's not even get to the first one. But related to that is there's more than one way to look at a particular situation,
Mm,
right? Like
yeah,
the way you look at it from your perspective can be different from somebody else. It
yeah,
makes me think where I think it was like a story or a picture where it's like, you know, they brought an elephant and they had four blind people come to touch different parts of the elephant.
yeah,
One touched, I think it was like the trunk,
yeah,
one touched the ear, one touched the foot, one touched the tail. Still the same elephant, but they have a different experience with it.
yeah.
And I think oftentimes what's helpful is to take the lesson from that to say, hey, you may have the same story or situation, but two people can look at it completely different,
Oh,
whether because it's neurodiversity, maybe
yeah.
it's because of life experiences, whatever the case may be. But each one of their viewpoints or opinions is worth exploring
Yeah.
because you never know what you can get out of that just by being open to what they have to share.
Oh, I am not even going to add to that. That was so pitch perfect. What a great note to end on. So, where can people learn more about you, Philip?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say, go to my website, philipblackett.com to learn more about me, what I've written, and how we can connect from here if they might be of interest to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. I encourage you check out the book as well, not just for its impact on this issue, but on the broader impact of how you can negotiate a better life for yourself. So again, thanks for joining us, Philip. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I learned a lot through this as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Me as well.
And for our listeners, I'm sure you got lots out of this episode. Make sure to subscribe and make sure to share this with the people in your life as well. The more we talk about these things, the more we normalize the conversation. I think the better outcomes we're going to have for everybody in the world to have a little more tolerance and a little more creativity, a little more appreciation, which all of which is a great thing. And before we sign off today, if you happen to be looking to uplevel your negotiation skills and believe that you want to negotiate a better life for yourself, check it out. We've got everything from online to group to mastermind and VIP experiences that can help you better leverage your natural power to be able to get more of what you want and deserve in life and get better outcomes for others at the same time. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. If you haven't got my book of the same name yet, please do that. The Art of Feminine Negotiation, How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.